Because my half-sister couldn't get pregnant, Song Huijin ordered someone to cut open my belly. It wasn't until the moment before death that I finally understood. That mistaken marriage years ago, when I got on the wrong bridal sedan, was never an accident. When I opened my eyes again, I was back 5 years in the past. The young Marquis stood before me, snow clinging to his clothes, his expression cold and sharp. He clenched his jaw and asked, word by word, "Shinsia, are you really going to go through with a mistake and marry someone else?" I dug my nails into my palm. This wasn't a dream. When Song Huijin lifted my bridal veil with a jade rui scepter, I raised my hand to block him. I recognized his hand. There was a scar on his pinky finger, left by a eunuch who had humiliated him when he was a fallen prince. In my previous life, the day after Song Huijin ascended the throne, that eunuch was charged with a false crime and tortured to death, cut piece by piece. But the man I was supposed to marry was Marquis Chongning, Gu Nanqing, not Prince Hui, Song Huijin. Song Huijin's hand froze, as if he realized something, but he still insisted on bringing the Rui closer to me. So I had no choice but to speak coldly. "Your Highness, I am Shenxia, not Shenzi." He paused in silence for a while before slowly coming back to himself. "Xia? How could it be you?" The one Song Huijin was supposed to marry was my half-sister, Shenzi. In my past life, it was all orchestrated by Song Huijin. A deliberate wedding switch that made me and Shenzi swap grooms. We were to be married on the same day, but amid the confusion, someone switched our sedan chairs. I ended up marrying Song Huijin. She married Gu Nanqing. He spoke carefully, trying to coax me. "I know how you feel about me. Before, I couldn't respond because of your engagement to the young Marquis Gu. Now there are so many guests outside, making a scene won't do either of us any good. Even if it's just as a concubine, why not go along with it?" I cut him off before he could smile. "We haven't bowed to heaven and earth, and you haven't lifted my veil yet. It's just a mix-up. No need to make it a big deal. We'll switch back in private." He was still unwilling to let go. "I'm afraid the Gu residence has already." "Gu Nanqing hasn't," I said firmly. I believed in him. Under my insistence, Song Huijin stopped the guests who were about to barge into the bridal room. According to his original plan, those guests, people he had planted long ago, were supposed to rush in after he lifted my veil and see my face. In my past life, I was blindly in love with Song Huijin. I didn't suspect a thing, even when the wedding switch was full of holes. I thought it was fate, a match made by heaven. So, under the eyes of all the guests, there was no way to undo the mistake. And I ended up marrying Song Huijin, just as I wished, even if it was only as his concubine. I sat in the bridal chamber for a long while, the weight of my ornate headpiece making my neck ache, until I suddenly heard noise and chaos outside. Someone walked through the snow, barging in despite the guards. A blast of cold wind hit me in the face. After a few messy footsteps, he stopped in front of me. Though still full of rage, he forced it down, gritted his teeth, and asked again, word by word, "Shinxia, are you really going to go through with this and marry someone else?" Everyone in the capital knew I had feelings for Song Huijin. When Gu Nanqing returned from the border, injured all over, the first thing I did was try to break off the engagement. Of course, the annulment didn't go through. Later, my father grounded me in the estate and had me forcibly married to Gu Nanqing. In my past life, when Gu Nanqing asked me that same question, I coldly said, yes. That proud young man, always the favorite of fate, suddenly bent his back, trembling all over in fury. He saw the affection between me and Song Huijin and fled the room in humiliation, leaving only one sentence behind. "Shenxia, even if you suffer in the future, I won't care anymore." Gu Nanqing knew I was unwilling in this marriage. If someone had told him on the way here that I orchestrated the wedding swap myself, he might have even believed it. Beneath the veil, all I could see were his crimson wedding robes and the snow-dusted boots. I reached out, grabbed the hem of his clothes, and pulled him into a hug. His robe was damp with snow, cold to the touch. I spoke in a muffled tone, pretending to complain. Gu Nanqing, what took you so long? His anger melted away in an instant. After a long pause, he removed his cloak, wrapped me tightly in it, and carried me out. His light cloud riders arrived soon after, surrounding the entire prince's mansion. No one dared stop us. Snowflakes filled the air. Through the tiny gap in my veil, I could just make out the sharp line of his jaw. He hugged me tighter, lips pressed together in frustration.
Fine.
Blame me. I was secretly swapped back with Shen Ziyi. Very few people knew about it. Gu Nanqing said that the moment he saw the bride step out of the sedan, he knew something was wrong. To protect my reputation, he didn't expose it on the spot. He found an excuse to avoid the wedding ceremony and rushed to Prince Huai's residence instead. On our way back to the Marquis's estate, I asked him in a small voice, Gu Nanqing, how did you know the bride wasn't me? Gu Nanqing let out a cold snort. The height was wrong, the scent was wrong, everything was off. I thought you'd randomly picked a maid to take your place just to run away from the wedding.
He paused.
Then, with his usual calm tone, he added, someone told me on the road that you planned to marry Prince Huai anyway. Now that I think about it, that wedding swap was no accident. He brushed away the lotus seeds and peanuts from the bed and laid me down on the soft red bedding. He lifted my red veil. After all these years, I finally saw Gu Nanqing again. His red robe was already soaked with snow. His lips, like ripe pomegranate seeds, looked even more vivid against the white. He was still the spirited young man I remembered. But when his eyes fell on me, his expression froze. His brows knitted slightly, lips drawn into a tight line. Why do you look so pale? He forced out the words from between his teeth. Did Song Huijin make you eat something dirty? I just shook my head and pressed my aching stomach. I'm fine. The moment I heard Song Huijin's voice, the pain in my lower abdomen had begun. Because in my previous life, to save Shenzi, Song Huijin had cut me open while I was still alive. Back then, I fell madly in love with the man who saved me from the lake, Prince Huai, Song Huijin. To marry him, I fought my parents again and again. The young ladies of the capital used to mock me behind my back. They said I was crazy to give up such a perfect marriage, only to insist on marrying a fallen, unfavored prince. After the mistaken marriage, since he already had an official fiancé, even as the legitimate daughter of the prime minister's family, I could only be a concubine. I was poisoned for Song Huijin, stabbed for him. I once knelt in the snow for 3 whole days, nearly ruining my health, just to beg a reclusive physician to come save him. I followed him across the country, helping him win over people's hearts. Eventually, he went from a disgraced prince to a revered emperor. No one dared look down on him again. No one dared to humiliate him. I was granted the title of noble consort and finally got pregnant. Everything seemed to be turning for the better, until right before childbirth. I discovered that he and my half-sister Shenzi had been secretly involved all along. That day he rescued me from the lake had been planned from the start. And the mistaken marriage was all part of a bigger scheme to keep both the Shun and Gu families in his grasp. Gu Nanqing went missing during a battle with the Rong people, and his fate remained uncertain. To seize control of the Gu family's power, Song Huijin secretly brought Shenzi, who was already officially Lady Gu, into the palace and kept her hidden for quite some time. On the day I was dying, Shenzi stood proudly before me, flaunting her victory. Looking down at me with arrogance, she said, "Sister, even if I still haven't managed to bear His Majesty's child, he still cherishes me. He wants me to raise the baby in your belly." I was struggling through a difficult labor, and Song Huijin ordered someone to cut open my belly. I loved Song Huijin all my life, but in the end, all I got from him was one cold command: save the child, not the mother. The pain of being cut open while still alive felt like it could tear my soul apart. It hurt so much, I couldn't even shed a single tear. My eyes landed on the intricate embroidery of Shenzi's robe. She smiled smugly and said, "This is cloud brocade from a foreign kingdom, worth a fortune. His Majesty gifted it all to me." The smell of blood was sharp and nauseating, But because I had studied medicine for years for Song Huijin's sake, I could still clearly detect the thick scent of musk drifting from her robe as it swayed. I looked at her and forced a smile. Sister, don't get too comfortable. We'll be reunited soon. Song Huijin never loved anyone. He only ever loved himself. Gu Nanqing had been running around for me, even bringing in a physician to examine me. Of course, they couldn't find anything wrong. Under Gu Nanqing's cold, sharp gaze, the doctor could only prescribe calming herbs and tonics. After the wedding mix-up in my past life, Gu Nanqing had been forced by his clan to marry Shinzi. On their wedding night, he used military affairs as an excuse to request a post at the border, leaving her behind in the estate, and he never returned. When news of my pregnancy spread, Gu Nanqing showed up at the palace's New Year's Eve banquet that year. At the time, I was unwell and afraid that something might happen to the child, so I left early. We ran into each other on the way out. He stood still in the falling snow, looked at me through the flurries, and stopped in his tracks. But he didn't overstep any bounds. His pain ran deep, all the way to his spine. But all he said was, "It's cold. Your Grace should wear another layer." The next day, my mother came to visit me in the palace, bringing a female physician to care for me. Later, I found out that the physician was someone Gu Nanqing had arranged. He was afraid someone might try to harm me in secret. He also knew I might refuse the physician to avoid suspicion. So he orchestrated everything, making sure she was sent to my mother and brought into the palace to protect me. The candlelight cast soft shadows across his features. I pulled Gu Nanqing's hand, made him sit by the bed, and said, "I'm really fine. Maybe I was just frightened earlier." The wide, flowing sleeves overlapped like drifting clouds. The gloom between Gu Nanqing's brows hadn't yet faded, but when he realized I was holding his hand, he clearly paused. He lowered his gaze, stood up in a fluster, and said stiffly, "Things were chaotic just now. I'll go calm the guests." He hesitated, then added, with his lips curved despite himself, "If you need anything, call for me. Wait here for me." It was a complete retreat. I watched in amusement as the tips of his ears turned red, and I waited patiently for the maids to help me out so we could complete the wedding ceremony again. But instead of a maid, I got Gu Nanqing climbing back in through the window. He took a wrapped pastry from his chest and stuffed it into my hand. "Eat something," he said. It was still warm. This was his own residence. He could have walked in through the front door or sent a servant. But instead, he chose to sneak in like he had a guilty conscience. He watched me finish the pastry, then climbed back out the window. I stared at his retreating figure, wanting to say something, but the approaching footsteps of a maid made me swallow the words. When all the formal rituals were finally over, it was Gu Nanqing who used the jade rui to lift my bridal veil again. His eyes were bright, brighter even than the candle flames in the winter night. That sentence, the one that had been lingering on my lips for so long, finally saw the light. I smiled and looked at him. "Marquis Gu, I'm truly happy to be your bride today." Before dawn even broke, news of the wedding mix-up between me and Shinzi had spread across the entire city. To protect my reputation, Gu Nanqing only said that the bride had fallen ill and the ceremony had to be delayed. Even when he came to find me later, he made no fuss. His light cloud riders surrounded Prince Huai's estate from the shadows. Aside from Prince Huai's guards, no one else noticed. But now, not even a full day had passed, and the scandal of the mistaken marriage was everywhere. It didn't take a genius to know whose doing that was. Even so, Gu Nanqing's parents didn't make a big deal out of it. They only said they were worried I had suffered a grievance. The day to return to my maiden home was near. I sat sleepily before the mirror as the maid combed my hair. Someone gently straightened my swaying head. In the warm yellow light of the bronze mirror, Gu Nanqing held up my coiled hair, dabbing red lip rouge on my lips with his fingertip, leaving behind a vivid, striking stain. His lashes drooped slightly, their arc graceful. His focus so intense it softened every reflection in the mirror. And just then, I suddenly remembered. I had once liked Gu Nanqing too. Back then, Many girls in the capital admired him. Whenever he rode through the streets, bashful young ladies would toss perfume sachets and handkerchiefs at him. That year, during the Lantern Festival, he won a rabbit-shaped lantern for me. He dodged all the other girls' gifts with ease, didn't even glance at them, and tossed the lantern right into my arms. The firelight reflected in his eyes was dazzling. The way my heart beat then, it felt exactly the same as it did now. Whether it was the familiar aura that surrounded him, or the way his dark eyes suddenly locked with mine, it all made my heart race. My ears felt hot, and I quickly looked away. When I saw the faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, I grew even more annoyed. The maids in the corner were giggling at me. I forced myself to close my eyes and pretend to be calm. But deep inside, I thought with a bit of resignation, if only he hadn't later on. Forget it. Best not to talk about what came after. I ignored Gu Nanqing the entire morning, but he acted as if nothing had happened, bringing me tea and pastries one moment, shielding me from snow, and pulling my cloak tighter the next. When our carriage collided with Prince Huai's on the road, I almost dropped my hand warmer. Gu Nanqing calmly placed it back into my hands, and before lifting the curtain to get out, he gave me a stern glare. I blinked in confusion, not understanding why he looked at me that way. Outside, snow swept in with a cold wind through the gap in the lifted curtain, brushing away the warmth that had filled the carriage. Even the hands Gu Nanqing had just warmed began to turn cold again. He had only just stepped out, and yet, I was already not used to his absence. After some meaningless pleasantries, Song Huijin offered for our carriage to go ahead. Song Huijin had always been one to hold grudges. Now that he had fallen from grace, he was naturally willing to play second to the powerful Marquis Chongning. But he would remember every slight, just like the eunuch who once humiliated him and was later slowly tortured to death. He could endure and feign weakness, only to pay it all back tenfold when the time came. Besides, the Huai prince's residence and the Chongning Marquis's estate weren't even in the same direction. Even the collision of the two carriages today was no accident. Sure enough, the moment Gu Nanqing turned to step back onto our carriage, someone among the watching crowd shouted loudly, "Everyone knows Second Mission has feelings for Prince Huai. I heard she got on Prince Huai's bridal sedan on purpose the other day, just to marry him." It was the young Marquis who dragged her back. The crowd erupted in whispers. This farce would soon become the latest gossip across the capital. Someone even dared to ask, "Is that true?" I sat steadily inside the carriage, but felt a strange sense of unease. Song Huijin had schemed so hard to pull off that wedding switch just to gain leverage over the Shun and Gu families. Now that everything had gone back to its rightful place, he wasn't trying to reconnect with the Gu family. Instead, he was tarnishing my name, trying to provoke Gu Nanqing. I couldn't figure out what he was thinking anymore. The chatter died down abruptly. Gu Nanqing's voice cut through like shards of ice. "If I hear another word of this nonsense, it won't just be a broken tooth next time." The cold wind stirred the curtain again, letting snow drift in. I let out a soft sigh and called out to him, "Husband." I didn't even know what I was sighing about. Maybe I sighed because he didn't know how to win people over with words, but then again, he didn't need to. His years of defending the border had already earned him a towering reputation. The people both admired and feared him. Gu Nanqing clearly didn't expect me to call him that. Though we were already married, I had never addressed him as husband before. In just a few steps, he came back to me, took my outstretched hand, and turned to block the wind and snow. Still trying to sound stern, he said, "It's cold out. Go back inside." We both knew that if rumors weren't stopped, they would only grow louder. Even if they eventually faded from public view, the stain on my name would remain. And any time it was mentioned again, it would never be truly wiped clean. I held onto his hand and looked toward the man still lying on the ground. He was clearly someone Song Huijin had planted. An ordinary bystander would have slinked away by now. Only someone with a death wish would dare cause a scene in front of the Chongning Marquis's household. I kept my tone calm, though I knew the truth full well. If you're going to slander my name, then let's call the authorities. The man tried to flee the moment he heard the word authorities. A flying stone struck his leg, and the light cloud riders accompanying us quickly subdued him. The crowd, having seen my firm stance with their own eyes, began to doubt the rumors. They seemed less inclined to believe them now. I offered a gentle, composed smile. Since my husband has come home with me today, we've brought some red packets to share with our neighbors. Please, enjoy some wine and tea. I reached for Gu Nanqing's money pouch. I had embroidered it for him myself, and this morning he'd pestered me to help fasten it to his belt. Now that he was removing it, he still clung to it tightly, unwilling to let go. The townsfolk eagerly crowded forward, offering blessings and asking for wedding rewards. And just like that, no one cared about the earlier commotion anymore. Before getting into the carriage again, I glanced at the one across from us. Song Huijin's gaze had never left me. There was a heavy stubbornness in his eyes, something I couldn't quite explain. And for some reason, at that exact moment, a wild thought popped into my mind. Could it be Song Huijin had been reborn too? But when I looked at him again, the wind and snow had blurred the view. I couldn't see clearly anymore. A faint breath brushed against my cheek. Gu Nanqing's voice drifted in softly. Is he that good-looking? Someone was clearly jealous. I shoved the money pouch back into his arms and pretended not to get the hint. Of course not. You're the best-looking. Gu Nanqing stared at me for a long while, long enough that my face started to go stiff. Finally, he let me off the hook and gave me a quick, satisfied smile. Then who am I? You are my husband. I knew what he wanted to hear, but I just couldn't bring myself to say that word again in private. So I replied seriously. You are Gu Nanqing, the Marquis of Chongning, the son-in-law of the Prime Minister's household. My cheeks flushed with warmth. Gu Nanqing didn't press me. He just raised an eyebrow slightly and told the attendants, let the prince's carriage go first. I am the husband of the lady, he said, pausing deliberately to emphasize the last word. Then, with a half-smile in his voice, he said loudly, clearly for the people across the way to hear, which means the lady's elder sister is my elder sister too. Letting her go first is only polite. The curtain fell just then, cutting off the cold wind and the swirling snow, and with them, that weighty gaze that had been following me from afar. The hand warmer had long gone cold. My hands were freezing after just a few minutes outside. I looked hopefully at Gu Nanqing's hands. My hands are cold. Seeing my eyes on him, Gu Nanqing gave a slow, proud smile. My ancestors made it a rule. I'm only allowed to warm my wife's hands. Inside that small carriage, my heart pounded like crazy. I casually pressed my palm against my chest, trying to quiet it. I didn't speak for a while. Then, with a grumble, I shoved my hands into his warm palms and turned away, flustered. It was my way of finishing the sentence I hadn't been able to say earlier. Yes, he's also the husband of the second daughter of the Prime Minister's household. The rest of the journey went smoothly, without any further incidents. My parents had been waiting at the estate gates since early morning. When they saw that I had arrived safely with Gu Nanqing, they were so relieved they nearly cried with joy. The homecoming banquet had already been prepared. Song Huijin also sat at our table. Because of the suspicion I'd had earlier, I paid extra attention to his every move. But this time, he behaved impeccably. Nothing seemed out of place. A maid's hand slipped while pouring tea, spilling the scalding liquid on my lap. Luckily, the thick winter layers protected me from injury. Gu Nanqing brushed the wet spot off my clothes. His long, dark lashes trembled. Are you burned? I shook my head and looked toward the maid's face. She wasn't from the Prime Minister's estate. She was one of the maids Shinzi had brought from Prince Huai's palace. Without a word, I gave Gu Nanqing's pinky a small squeeze, then let go, and simply said I needed to change clothes. Sure enough, when I came out after changing, I saw Song Huijin waiting under the eaves. I knew he'd deliberately sent me away. What I didn't expect was for his first sentence to be, "What's so good about Gu Nanqing that you'd betray me for him without hesitation?" I was stunned. And it was exactly because of this line that I suddenly realized The one who had been reborn, like me, wasn't Song Huijin. It was my half-sister, Shunzi. No wonder she avoided eye contact with me at the banquet earlier. She was afraid that looking into my eyes would give her away. I couldn't help but laugh. So, Shunzi told you I betrayed you for Gu Nanqing? Back then, even though I tried to break off the engagement with Gu Nanqing, I never made any promises to Song Huijin. And in our previous lives, it was he who betrayed me first with the wedding switch. What betrayal was there to speak of? So the person with memories of our past life was definitely not him. Song Huijin stayed quiet for a moment, his eyes downcast, then said firmly, "You really are just like her." I could guess now that Shinzi's end in the previous life hadn't been a good one. When the marriage switch failed, she must have told Song Huijin, half true and half false, about her memories from the past life, and then turned the blame toward me. A fine example of using someone else's hand to kill. But what she probably didn't expect was that Song Huijin would lose his composure over her words and come confront me directly. His voice was tight, almost trembling as he lowered his head, asking, "Why?" He was stubbornly searching for an answer, as if he had once truly loved me. But I didn't want to argue about tangled emotions and messy details. I only asked calmly, "Why would you believe everything Shinzi says is true?" My engagement to Gu Nanqing was arranged long ago.
I was always meant to marry him.
Even if there was a mistaken marriage, setting things right now is just returning order to chaos. And if I really did leave you behind, shouldn't you reflect on what you did wrong? Shouldn't you be the one asking yourself why I left? He was caught off guard by my words. When I turned to go, he reached out to grab me. Only then did I notice his eyes were slightly red, as if he was truly heartbroken. "But you liked me first." His fingers turned white from how tightly he gripped his hand, voice almost a growl. "Do you even realize what would have happened if someone had caught us being involved? The Goof family would have cast you out, left you without hesitation. Only I would have taken you in." I didn't understand where this sudden obsession of Song Huijin's came from. I dodged the hand he reached out with, and without warning, he collapsed to the ground. He lay there, eyes stubbornly fixed on me. Even his lips bled from how hard he bit them in resistance. It was the Ruanjazan I had prepared, a soft bone powder that weakens the limbs. Why would he assume I'd come unguarded? Why would he think Gu Nanqing would let me meet him alone? Hidden nearby, Gu Nanqing could no longer hold back. I turned my head at the sound and saw him stride over, swiftly pulling me into his arms. With one hand, he covered my eyes, not letting me look. His voice was like ice dipped in steel, low and cutting. I never imagined Prince Huai would harbor such vile intentions toward his wife's younger sister. I knew Gu Nanqing had understood the signal I gave him at the banquet. That's why he played along, allowing me to leave alone, then quietly followed behind with an excuse. A death in the Prime Minister's estate would be no small matter. And no matter how far he'd fallen, Song Huijin was still a prince. I tugged on Gu Nanqing's sleeve and looked up at him, chin lifted. Quietly, I said, "Let's go. Mother must be getting anxious." Gu Nanqing didn't object. He simply tightened the arm around my waist. As we were leaving, I saw him sneakily kick Song Huijin behind me. The cloud-patterned boot landed squarely on his wrist, seemingly by accident. But sweat immediately beaded on Song Huijin's forehead. That one kick would likely leave him bedridden for 10 days at least. It wasn't until half an hour later that Song Huijin returned to the banquet. The powder's effect had worn off, but he came back disheveled, soaked in cold sweat. My parents looked a little panicked. Even if he had fallen from favor, he was still a prince. If something had happened to him here, the consequences would have been serious. But Song Huijin didn't say a word about what had happened in the garden. After all, he hadn't achieved what he came to do, and had even been humiliated by Gu Nanqing. It was hardly a glorious story. With a stiff face, he forced a smile. "I tripped earlier and sprained my wrist."
Ha.
In the midst of all the concerned questions, Gu Nanqing sat alone at the table and let out a cold chuckle. The main road through the Prime Minister's estate is wide and clear. And yet His Highness still managed to trip like that. Truly impressive. He let out a soft sigh, voice full of dry sarcasm. A performance worthy of admiration. The room fell into silence. Even Song Huijin, as composed as he was, could no longer bear to stay. Claiming to feel unwell, he made a hasty exit. It was the first time I realized Gu Nanqing could be so sharp-tongued when mocking someone. He leaned in close and muttered, casting me a fierce side glance. "You're still laughing? You brought this mess on yourself. Just wait till we get home. I'll deal with you then." Then he shoved a handful of freshly shelled pine nuts into my palm, lifted his chin, and walked off like he didn't care. I looked toward where he was chatting casually with my father and couldn't help but chuckle. I sat back down and quietly finished the pine nuts, deciding I'd talk to him about Song Huijin once we got home. Whether it was Song Huijin or my half-sister Shinzi, who had been reborn, I wasn't afraid. Because the things Song Huijin had done in the shadows to seize the throne last time, no one knew them better than I did. On the way home, the snow had stopped. Gu Nanqing shut the door and tossed a new hand warmer into my lap. Lifting his chin, he said, "All right, what exactly happened between you and Song Huijin?" Gu Nanqing had never asked about my past with Song Huijin. It was our wedding night, and I didn't want to bring him up to ruin the mood, so I never mentioned it. I wasn't sure where to begin. Gu Nanqing had likely overheard everything Song Huijin said to me in the garden. If I wanted to lie, I could just insist that Song Huijin was harassing me. Gu Nanqing trusted me. He wouldn't press further. But I couldn't do that. I sighed, pulled out a sheet of Xian paper, and began writing down all the battles, big and small, I remembered happening a few years later. Some were already a blur, but I clearly remembered the major victories and devastating defeats. I remembered how, 2 years later, the ambush by the Rong people caught Great Liang completely off guard. That was the start of all the chaos, and the perfect opening for Song Huijin to claim the throne. The emperor was assassinated in Qingzhou. The crown prince disappeared. The remaining princes fought bitterly for power and destroyed each other. With leverage over key ministers, Song Huijin presented a supposed imperial edict and was crowned emperor. But the imperial court was unstable, and the Rome invasion had only just begun. It was Gu Nanqing's sword that brought order back to the court when the ministers argued over the authenticity of the imperial edict. Later, he led troops to repel the enemy, dancing at the edge of life and death more than once. I wrote down everything I could remember, line after line, filling the page before pushing the densely written paper toward Gu Nanqing. The moment his eyes fell on the first line, his expression turned cold. No surprise there. The very first incident I mentioned was the salt license case in Qingzhou. I'd only learned after Song Huijin took the throne that the Rong people had already infiltrated the salt trade in Qingzhou that year. Gu Nanqing had been secretly investigating the salt permits, but before he got anywhere, the emperor was ambushed, right in Qingzhou. He read all the way to the end in silence. When he finally looked up again, his expression was complicated. I knew what he wanted to ask, but I didn't give him the chance. I went on speaking without pause. After Song Huijin ascended the throne, he promoted a former personal attendant named Yuan Sheng. The man was ruthless and later became a powerful court official by his side. To maintain balance, he repeatedly targeted the Marquis's household, even the old Marquis. If it's possible, take him out now. I rambled on for a long time, telling him every last detail I could recall. I finally felt the weight in my chesties a little, and seeing Gu Nanqing still so quiet, I cautiously asked, "Do you have any other questions?" He stared at me for a long moment, lips pressed into a tight line. Then he said, after a slight pause, "I believe everything you said, but how do you know all this?" My fingers froze slightly. Bitterness welled up in my throat. Even now, I could still taste the bitterness of the labor-inducing potion that had been forced down my throat before I died. I lowered my head, staring at the ink that had bled into the paper. My voice was soft. "Gu Nanqing, I've already died once." I had thought he would laugh or assume I was making up some kind of joke to fool him, but he didn't. He reached out and pulled me into his arms. Only then did I realize my body had been trembling all this time. He gently patted my back, Didn't ask any more questions, just whispered, "I'm here." I stayed in that embrace for a long time. The stiffness in my limbs finally began to thaw. He even took out a handkerchief and carefully wiped away my tears. That, somehow, made me feel a bit embarrassed. I knew that even if Gu Nanqing said he believed me, he'd still need time to accept it. So I looked for an excuse to slip away. But he lazily called out to me and caught my wrist in one swift motion. "Hold on. Who said I was done asking questions?" His lashes drooped sleepily, expression cool. "What really happened in the capital while I was gone this past year?" He let out a cold laugh. "What was it that made you suddenly fall for Prince Huai? You even came to the Marquis's estate asking to break off our engagement. It was only a year. How did your feelings change so fast?" He pressed closer with every word. Frustrated by his relentless questions, I snapped, a little angry. Why I liked him. Shouldn't you be the one to answer that? Realizing I'd said too much, I bit my lip and clutched my palm, refusing to speak again. Under his persistent questioning, I finally muttered one line. "I heard what you said when you were speaking to the Crown Prince's son. You said we were just a couple thrown together to get by. That year during the Lantern Festival, Gu Nanqing and I got separated in the crowd. By the time I found him, the Crown Prince's son was tugging at his sleeve and teasing him. What, you like second mission that much? Lost her for a minute and you're already in a panic?" Gu Nanqing and I had known each other since childhood. Our engagement had been arranged by both our mothers when we were young. Every time we saw each other growing up, we bickered like cats and dogs. Mother would always laugh and say I lost all my ladylike manners whenever he was around. Later, as the Marquis of Chongning's household rose in prominence, girls across the capital envied me for having such a good match. Some even came up to me just to say, "If not for that childhood engagement, do you really think Gu Nanqing would marry you?" I was so angry I couldn't eat for 3 days. So that night, holding the rabbit lantern he'd won for me, I stood still, wanting to hear his answer. But Gu Nanqing simply shook off the prince's son's hand and replied dismissively, "Who likes her? It's just a match arranged by our parents. We're stuck living together, that's all." I froze in place, eyes red, and ran off crying. I even ripped off one of the rabbit lantern's ears. Later, Gu Nanqing found me by the lakeside, but I refused to talk to him. I was waiting for him to coax me. Who knew that the very next day, he was ordered to leave the capital. And not long after, I fell into the lake and was saved by Song Huijin. At first, yes, there was a part of me acting out of spite. I wanted to make him jealous. So I made a public display of my feelings for Prince Huai. Even after Gu Nanqing came back from the front lines injured, I still went to his estate alone to demand an annulment. That day, I even left him the best medicine I had for healing wounds. Mother knew I was doing it out of pettiness and helplessly teased me for being stubborn. How could I bear to marry someone I truly liked? If he saw me only as an obligation, just someone to get by with? What if someone else had been engaged to him? Would he still have married them without hesitation? Of course, the annulment never went through. I never really wanted to break it off. Then came the mistaken marriage. Before everyone's eyes, Song Huijin lifted my veil. No one knew how flustered and panicked I was in that instant when I saw his face. I was already feeling wronged, and the first thing he said to me was a cold accusation. "Xinxia, are you really going to go along with this mistake and marry someone else?" My eyes instantly filled with tears, but I held them back and said coldly, "Yes." Neither of us backed down. The rabbit lantern I had hidden in my dowry trunk ended up staying at the Marquis's estate. I never got a chance to see it again. Gu Nanqing clearly remembered that lantern festival. He lifted his hand to cover his eyes, lips pale. So that's what happened. He clasped my hand tightly, refusing to let go, as if afraid I would run away. His lashes hung low, casting a soft shadow under his eyes. That day, that was my fault. Back at the Imperial Academy, the Crown Prince's son always competed with me. I didn't want him to pursue you. So, I said something I shouldn't have. His face turned even paler. I didn't know you cared. Even when you came to see me after I returned to the capital, it was to break off the engagement. You told me you liked Prince Huai. But we've known each other for so long, and you've never once told me you liked me. Don't like him. Please. He suddenly looked up, leaning in, his breath overwhelming and all-encompassing. I can be better than him. Has he ever kissed you the way I have? Held you like this? Do you really like him? More than you like me? It's all my fault. So, can you please stop ignoring me? Just one misstep. If either of us had been a little more persistent that lantern festival, if either of us had bowed our heads during the wedding mix-up, if only we had been more honest with each other, maybe in our previous lives, we wouldn't have missed our chance. No, I tightened my fingers around the tears that had fallen into his palm and answered seriously, I never liked him more than I liked you. After the mistaken marriage in my past life, regret was useless. There was a time I truly tried to live well with Song Huijin. He treated me gently and never let me suffer humiliation even in front of his legal wife. Perhaps I did fall for him for a while. But after he became emperor, state affairs kept him busy. He visited me less and less. The palace filled with concubines and beauties. And in the end, he cut open my belly. That one phrase, preserve the child, not the mother, severed all my feelings for him completely. Gu Nanqing shook his head. I don't believe it. He leaned in closer, his eyes shimmering. Unless you kiss me. The hand hanging beside the couch suddenly clenched tight. My heart pounded again, unruly as ever. I hesitated, then leaned forward and brushed a kiss against his cheek. Gu Nanqing's lips curved in a smile, his eyes brightened. Not enough, he said. Fuming, I pinched him hard. He lowered his lashes, feigning grievance, and let out a soft gasp. This man had always known how to push boundaries. After that, I rarely saw Song Huijin again. He was busy recruiting loyal followers and using leverage to gain power. 2 years might seem short, but for me, they were enough. To strike a snake, aim for its 7 inches. To take down Song Huijin, there could be no slow, cautious plan. It had to be swift and final. So, I didn't interfere with his recruitment of followers. Shenzi was still by his side. If he sensed that I was deliberately obstructing him, he would become suspicious. When the emperor was ambushed in Qingzhou, Gu Nanqing went to rescue him. Everything unfolded as it had in the previous life. The capital descended into chaos. Those with hidden ambition finally bared their fangs. Gu Nanqing had already eliminated Yuan Sheng, Song Huijin's right-hand man, ahead of time. So, when the day of his enthronement came, the one he sent to summon me was a completely unfamiliar palace eunuch. I walked down that long, familiar palace corridor, feeling almost as if I had stepped back into my previous life. The eunuch bowed deeply. Second Miss Shen, His Majesty has summoned you. Not even his servants called me Lady Gu anymore. Though he hadn't been formally enthroned yet, Song Huijin already acted the part of emperor. Before I entered the hall, female officials thoroughly searched me. Clearly, Song Huijin was still haunted by what happened during the family visit, afraid I'd pull out another packet of soft bone powder and catch him off guard. He had changed into the imperial regalia. Golden thread shimmered beneath his robes, revealing the faint outline of a 5-clawed dragon. Song Huijin reached to take my hand. I dodged. He didn't seem to mind. He strode forward on his own and pointed at a distant path with a smile. That's the imperial path. Only the emperor may walk there. When I confer your title, I'll lead you down it. I froze, emotions tangled in my chest. That path, aside from the emperor, only the empress is allowed to walk it on the day of her investiture. Was he planning to make me empress? Looking at the vast palace before him, he gave a slight smile. A formal marriage like this, at least you won't be wronged. As for your current status, I may not be able to touch Gu Nanqing for now, but changing your identity won't be difficult. I remained silent and asked, Where is Shenzi? His expression relaxed. After that family visit, I realized she tried to use me to harm you, so I had her placed under close watch. He sounded smug. At first, She tried to blackmail me with memories from a past life. But if I could ascend the throne once with no help, I can do it again, without her. When I didn't respond, his voice dropped, and he muttered to himself. I kept having the same dream. In it, I made you my imperial consort, but everything after that was a blur. So, in the life she described, you really did marry me, didn't you? I spoke calmly.
Yes.
And later, you had my belly cut open to give my child to Shinzi. His entire body trembled. His gaze toward me quivered. So you hate me? I didn't answer. He fell silent too. After a long pause, he murmured as if convincing himself. It's all right, it's all right. We can start over. I didn't know if he was shaken by my words, but he insisted I witness his coronation, wanted me to see his moment of glory with my own eyes. The officials all knelt in worship. I stood to the side, watching coldly, unmoved. Song Huijin had just offered me a shallow smile when an arrow sliced through the air, knocking his crown askew. He grabbed a nearby eunuch and dragged him in front as a shield, shouting, "Where are the imperial guards?" The guards were there. They had always been there. But their allegiance no longer belonged to him. The once loyal guards now turned their weapons on him. Archers flooded the walls above. The Qingyun cavalry rode in formation, swift and precise. In the chaos, Song Huijin still tried to grab me. But Gu Nanqing stepped in front, shielding me. With a flick of his wrist, his sword slashed Song Huijin's hand. Gu Nanqing had been following me the entire time. Song Huijin's summons had been unexpected, but Gu Nanqing knew he would never truly let me go. So he disguised himself as a eunuch and trailed just far enough behind. There was no escape. Song Huijin was forced to kneel, surrounded by Qingyun cavalry, his gaze on me filled with pain. I didn't know what that pain meant. I didn't want to. Maybe he simply regretted not being able to use me as a hostage to escape. I'd already learned that lesson in my past life. He loved no one but himself. The true emperor appeared, protected by guards. The assassination in Qingzhou had been staged. The spies among the Rong people had long since been dealt with. It was all part of a larger plan. Now, everything had been set right. Song Huijin was stripped of his title and imprisoned in the office of clan affairs. Gu Nanqing said they found a dungeon in Song Huijin's estate. A woman inside had her face ruined and was nearly driven mad. I figured it was Shunzi. After all, the prince of Huai's manor had suddenly lost a side consort. When I visited her in prison, it was spring. Winter had passed. The branches once buried in snow were now budding and blooming. She stared blankly when she saw me. You? Why is it you? She'd been locked up too long and knew nothing of what had happened outside. Her clothes were in tatters. Her face was unrecognizable. Fresh and old wounds covered her body, no inch of skin untouched. She lunged at the bars, gripping them tightly with trembling fingers. She glared at me with hatred. Why are you still alive? Long captivity and torture had left her mind broken. She couldn't tell memory from reality anymore. At times she thought I'd already died during the C-section. At others, she hated me for still being alive. The most arrogant third princess in the palace often used her as a point of comparison, yet always ended up humiliated. He had seen her many times. She never put on airs, nor did she look down on him like the other noble ladies because of his fall from favor. Every time he saw her, he would freeze uncontrollably. Later, he thought about it for a long time and concluded that perhaps he did like her just a little. The midwife said she was having a difficult labor, and it was unlikely she would make it. Shinzi seized the moment to weep, saying it was her own failure for not bearing him a child. How could she possibly carry his heir? Even he was sick of the musk he'd gifted her. Song Huijin was growing tired of her. Gu Nanqing was dead, or so he thought. If not for the fact that he still needed Shinzi to control the Qingyun cavalry, he wouldn't have spared her another glance. He stood there, dazed, watching basin after basin of blood being carried out of the chamber. Shinzi said, "I've heard that in the common folk, when a woman can't deliver, they perform a cesarean. At least it won't be a double fatality." He immediately summoned the midwife and asked evenly, "If we cut her open, can the child survive?" The midwife was hesitant. "It's possible." He gave a faint, cold reply. "Then do it." So he ordered her belly to be cut open while she was still alive. The imperial heir lived. A baby boy. He should have been happy. It was his first son. But he couldn't smile. Restlessness gnawed at him. He flicked his robe and left. Later, Shenzi offered to raise the child. Though he usually yielded to her in everything for the sake of the Qingyan cavalry, this time he gave a harsh warning. He said coldly, "Put away thoughts you shouldn't have." This was his first prince. His child with her. Song Huaijin knew Shenzi wouldn't treat the boy well. Within half a year, there'd probably be news of his accidental death. How could he allow that? When the child turned 1, the capital fell. His throne had never been stable, not until Gu Nanqing fell into the Rong people's trap, his fate unknown. Everyone said Gu Nanqing was dead. He believed it too, thought he could slowly consume the Qingyan cavalry and solidify his rule. Who would have thought Gu Nanqing wasn't dead at all? A blade to his throat, Gu Nanqing asked. "Where is she?" "The imperial mausoleum?" "Yes, she should be there. That's where imperial consorts are buried." In that instant, fear and rage flooded his mind, but when he saw the look on Gu Nanqing's face, he strangely felt a surge of exhilaration. Wounded by the blade, he bled and said through clenched teeth, "Even if she's dead, you'll never know where she is." He dreamed again. Song Huaijin hadn't had that dream in a long time. Shenzi used to say it was a glimpse into his past life. After Gu Nanqing killed him, the dream stopped. He awoke to dusk. The ancestral prison was desolate. Prolonged silence had made him fear the quiet. Beyond the thick walls, he heard fireworks and festivities in the distance. Once, he would have loved such liveliness. Now it made him anxious. He sent a guard to ask what was going on. The reply, "Yesterday, Lady of the Marquis of Chongning gave birth. The Marquis is handing out rewards in celebration." What? His eyes reddened. In a daze, he turned and stumbled away. His mind was chaos. The guard's words echoed alongside flashes of his dreams. Night fell. He tripped on a stone and tumbled into a lake. He tried to struggle to call out, but he couldn't swim. Something seemed to pull him deeper. No sound came from his throat. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He had been an emperor in his last life. The next day, the guards noticed the silence and entered the courtyard. They found him drowned in the water, already dead. Extra. Gu Nanqing. The new emperor called him Yafu, imperial father. That was her child. Quick to learn, intelligent like his mother. During the boy's early years, Gu Nanqing served as regent. Some ministers disapproved. After all, he had killed the former emperor. And the new emperor was just a child. How could he manage a court? Whispers eventually reached the young emperor's ears. At 10, he spoke with measured composure. "Yafu need not mind the court's chatter. I know you remained only because of the late consort. Otherwise, you'd have left long ago." Gu Nanqing truly didn't care. Reputation meant nothing to him. But then he looked down and saw the boy watching him, eyes bright and intent. His heart clenched. He turned his head. The boy's eyes were more and more like hers. He'd seen death many times, but at that moment, his eyes grew damp. His body felt heavy. He thought he heard someone crying his name. Someone called him the regent. Someone called him Yafu, but not the one he wanted to hear most. It was noisy. He grew irritated. Past years flashed before him. He suddenly realized perhaps his time had come. And then he heard someone call him Gu Nanqing. The voice was soft and familiar, one that had always filled him with joy. He had waited over a decade, yet never heard her call his name again. He saw her standing before him, hand reaching toward him. With a hint of complaint, her voice sulked. "Gu Nanqing, what took you so long?" As he clasped her hand, he panicked. Was this what he looked like when he died? His hair had grayed early. His face was scarred from battle. Children cried at the sight of him. Would she be afraid of him? Would she find him ugly? Would she not want him anymore? He didn't want her to cry. He didn't want her to reject him. Gu Nanqing awoke with a splitting headache. He vaguely remembered dreaming, a long, long dream. But the details had already faded. All he remembered was waiting for someone. Someone he never managed to meet. A spring breeze carried peach blossoms through the window. The person he loved most was lying quietly beside him. For no reason at all, he felt a rush of relief. Relief, though for what, he couldn't say. She stirred at his movements, sleepily glanced at him, and burrowed into his arms before drifting off again. Gu Nanqing suddenly remembered that day. Before he lifted her veil, he thought it was a dream come true meant only for him. Then he heard her say, "Young Marquis, I'm very happy to be marrying you today." In that moment, it felt like butterflies stirred in his chest. Years of unspoken love had welled up within him. But how could such overwhelming love be hidden? He couldn't hide it, so he stopped trying. That day, he smiled faintly and replied,
I'm
happy too. He had waited so long for this day. The end.